I thought one of the best RPGs that came out on the PlayStation before Final Fantasy VII was Wild Arms. Honestly, I still feel it had a lot going for it back then too. It was a Western-themed title that turned a lot of heads before RPGs even caught on here, and it kind of stood out from the crowd too. The game had 3 distinct characters, and dungeons utilized puzzle solving in a fun way. It even had an interesting story that defied a lot of RPG cliches, and let's just say there were plenty of those back then. The positive reception Wild Arms received led to a solid fan base in the days when the PlayStation was the platform for RPGs. So what did the game's small developer Mediavision do? That's right, it created a follow-up and released it 3 years later in North America. It was known as Wild Arms Second Ignition in Japan, but here it was known as Wild Arms 2. And Wild Arms 2 brought back a lot of the best qualities from the original, but also innovated in a lot of ways too. Before I get into all that though, please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel for future retro gaming content. Now that that part's done with, what needs to be said first is that a lot of the things about Wild Arms 2 look just like Wild Arms on the surface. So yeah, it is true that the Western influence, battle system, arms, and menus are all strikingly similar to the original game, and Wild Arms 2 probably has the same feel you'd expect it to coming from that one. Even the game's font is exactly the same one used in the original. When you dive beneath the surface though, you will notice a lot of differences. I think the most obvious is probably the game's visual approach. Instead of a fully 2D overhead world with character sprites, this one uses a fully 3D polygonal world. The characters themselves are still sprites, but they're far more complex and better animated than those in the original. You can adjust the camera with the L1 and R1 buttons so it's easier to see what's around you, and this will be really helpful to you. But there will still be points where things obscure your vision as well. The visual feel is a lot like Xenogears and Grandia, and I think that style holds up really well. Battles still use 3D characters and 3D polygons, but the characters are a bit more realistic than they were in the first game. They still look blocky and a bit deformed, but this game shows you how much the graphical quality of PlayStation games improved even over the life of a single console. Outside of the enhanced character polygons, you probably won't notice much of a difference from the original Wild Arms though. All that said, you'll certainly be surprised to find out the first game's magic system, which used MP, was totally scrapped. It's replaced instead with force points, or FP, which is handled quite a bit differently. At the start of each battle, your party's FP is actually equal to the combined levels of your characters. There are both special abilities and force abilities. Special abilities require you to have a minimum number of FP to use, but don't expend the resource itself. Force abilities, on the other hand, do expend FP. It is a little confusing, but the only really important thing to remember is not to stress out too much about conserving FP because you do regenerate it over time anyway. You'll probably end up using a lot more special abilities than you think you will as a result. In addition to the magic system, the story of Wild Arms 2 is also quite a bit different from the first game too. This one still takes place in the land of Filgaia, where life is slowly dying and greenery is turning to desert. You play as Ashley Winchester, a soldier serving Mary as king. As the game begins, Ashley is sent on a mission to rescue a young boy named Tony Stark from 2 kidnappers. And no, we're not talking about Iron Man Tony Stark here. Ashley succeeds in rescuing Tony, but releases an ancient monster called Calivos in the process. He manages to slay the beast and save the day, but is punished for acting in insubordination of his orders. Nevertheless, Ashley's skill is recognized and he's promoted to a special musketeer unit called Arms. During his initiation ceremony though, a demon gate is opened and everyone is turned into monsters. Great. Ashley survives only by making contact with Argatlam, the legendary blade that saved the world from demons in the past. I did skip a few details here and there because there are some pretty major story spoilers, but I will say that guilt and a terrible revelation about the incident eat at Ashley throughout the adventure. Just like the first Wild Arms game, you do get to choose between 3 characters at the start. So instead of selecting Ashley, you can go with Brad, a former hero now war criminal, or Lilka, the young sorceress. Whichever you choose, their paths cross and all characters are important to the story, but the main protagonist really does seem to be Ashley. Once you finish the intro story for the first character you choose, you'll play the next ones anyway, so the order doesn't really matter too much. The 3 characters get wrapped up in a struggle against a terrorist organization called Odessa that is trying to conquer the world. If I had to say, the story of Wild Arms 2 is a bit darker and more serious than the first Wild Arms. It has some of the same charm for sure, but you'll definitely explore different themes. I enjoyed the humor packed into the English localization, but I don't think the localization itself was perfect. If you play this one today, you'll notice a few grammatical errors and odd translation choices, but I don't think it ruined the entire experience or anything like that. Wild Arms 2 allows your characters to advance in power beyond levels through upgrading your arms at shops. You can only upgrade each arm a maximum of 10 times though, and these 10 have to be divided between attack power, hit percentage, and bullets. This system really forces you into a lot of trade-offs, and you really have to make a lot of tough choices. Each of the 3 categories are more useful for certain arms, and you aren't really given very good guidance on it. In Wild Arms 2, you learn new spells almost in the exact same way as in the first game. You find crest items, combine 2 elements together on a grid, and gain a new spell. Wild Arms 2's composer was Michiko Naruke, the same one from the original game, so this definitely adopts a similar style as that one. You'll hear a few tracks with the distinct whistling sound that made the first one so unique, and that was a great touch I thought because it connected it to the world of the series. That being said though, there's also many tried and true songs that seem like they could have been lifted from the world of Breath of Fire or another RPG franchise from that time. At over 100 tracks, the score is huge. There's tons of variety here with multiple battle tunes and a different dungeon track for each dungeon in the game. And that fact alone certainly makes the soundtrack stand above almost all other RPGs of this era. My biggest criticism of Wild Arms 2 is that no locations even appear on the overworld map until you scan for them. So this means you end up wandering all around to every corner of the world using a scan a mission thingy until you find the next area. This is quite honestly a dumb mechanic. It's stupid and cumbersome and totally frustrating. It'll make you lose your mind and waste your time with more random encounters. It was just totally unnecessary. At the same time, I try to be a little forgiving about this because I do think Wild Arms 2 offers several great conveniences that kind of make up for this. One of the most refreshing is that you can actually avoid random encounters with weaker enemies. When you see a white exclamation point above your head, that means you can use scan to avoid getting into the battle. And man, I really wish more RPGs had this kind of feature. It really empowered me to choose when I would grind and when I would proceed in the story. Also, you can swap between characters during battle, and that was a really fun way to experiment with new options and adapt your party to enemy threats. Wild Arms 2 is an overlooked game that probably came out a bit too late, because in 2000, many people had already gone on to the PlayStation 2 or Dreamcast. But honestly, it's a solid RPG at its core, with fun characters, creative advancement mechanics, and an improved battle system. I do think the story was a bit convoluted, especially later in the game, but it was still an interesting tale I could get into. The story adopts enough themes from the first game so as not to make it completely alien to that universe, but it still ventures in enough new directions to make things fresh as well. I honestly think it struck a pretty good balance when it all comes down to it. Wild Arms 2 doesn't reinvent the RPG wheel whatsoever, but it does bring some great qualities that fans of the genre will love. In the end, I don't think it's quite as good as the first Wild Arms game, but it's still an admirable sequel that's worth playing. But now I want to hear from you. Do you have any fun memories about Wild Arms 2? How do you think it compares to the rest of the series? Let me know in a comment below. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell below for more retro gaming content. If you want early access to the videos I produce and other perks, please consider supporting my channel by becoming a Patreon patron or via the YouTube Join feature.